Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
A new GAO assessment looks ahead at emerging technologies where early decisions could shape how they're used and how they're governed across government. We talk through what those trends are and what Congress and agencies need to be thinking about now with GAO's Chief Scientist, Dr. Sterling Thomas. Dr. Thomas, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
This is not a topic we often cover when we talk to GAO. We're talking policies and processes. And with you, we're going to talk about science. When you think about the science issues that Congress asks you to cover, they're typically not very far over the horizon. What were you trying to understand with this report right now, looking out 10 years or more?
So science is a major driver of the American economy and obviously brings lots of cool things to us as consumers and American citizens. And so what we're looking at when we look at science and technology that's 10 years out is we're trying to give Congress a little bit of a heads up. You know, what is interesting out there, what is maturing in the science and technology domain that might be important to Americans in the next 10 years. And that's the entire purpose of this report and many of our other reports that look maybe not out 10 years, but look a few years out.
And when you look at science and technology trends, what are you actually evaluating? How do you separate what's credible in the near term from like science fiction in the long term?
That's a great question. And that's the tricky part of it. And when we do these reports, we're not being exhaustive. We issue one periodically, usually once a year, that looks at 3 to 4 different technologies. What we're looking for specifically is we're saying, okay, this technology is maturing to the point that it could potentially come to market in the form of some new device or some new capability that will be important to American citizens. In addition to that, we think there's some economic component to it. If, for example, one of the ones we looked at last year was manufacturing in space. And that's the reason that we thought that was interesting is there's been some demonstrations. There's definitely a need for this type of material that benefits from low, very almost near zero gravity. But additionally, the cost of just launching things into low Earth orbit is coming down to the point it could become economically viable.
Well, one of the things I love about the 3 trends in this year's report is that none of them has to do with AI. So, yay, we're not going to have an AI conversation. But tell us about the 3 trends that you call out.
So this year we looked at 3 really interesting technologies that are out there. The first is neural implants. And we're looking neural implants exist today, and they're mostly in the research phase, but they're focused on dealing with a particular illness or disease and correcting that or trying to make life easier for someone who's disabled. We're looking at them from the perspective of, well, what if I just choose to get a neural implant? The second one we're looking at is general purpose robotics. And I'm sorry to say this does have a little bit of AI in it, but the idea here, and this has been something that's been science fiction for a while, but it's actually getting close. Think about a robot that is designed in such a way that it's not for a single purpose. It's not like your vacuum cleaner robot. It's not like a robotic arm that's manufacturing something there. It's a device that it could be humanoid. It could be something completely different that is there to just do what is helpful for you in your life or your work. And so we look both at the technology and then the software, and that's where the AI comes in. And the last one is really interesting. It kind of fits into the series we've been talking about that I mentioned in the early part of orbital debris cleanup. So there's a lot of material that we are putting into specifically low Earth orbit. This is where like Starlink satellites are, a lot of the other cluster satellites. What we're looking at is, okay, once these have reached the end of life, which isn't very long, most Starlink satellites and satellites of these constellations only last about 5 years. What are we doing with them? Are we cleaning them up? And are we making space for the next generation of technology to be launched?
I'm speaking with Dr. Sterling Thomas. He's GAO's Chief Scientist. As you relate those 3 trends in the report, you use a framework called STEER to evaluate them and to set up how agencies should be thinking about them. Can you walk us through the framework and then how you hope it shapes how both Congress and agencies are approaching these technologies?
Yeah, when we look at STEER, when we look at a technology, we use the framework of STEER. We're after how do we think about this, right? And so the ST are obvious. This is science and technology. But the next parts we're looking at, what is the economics of it? What is the environmental impact? We also, as part of the S, we look at the societal impact. I mean, think about AI is a great example. It's already had tremendous societal impacts. And the last R we're looking at is what is the regulatory framework for this? Meaning, is there and this is why it's important to Congress, is there something that needs to be considered to accelerate this technology? Is there something that needs to be considered in order to make sure it's used in the appropriate way? Think about, some of the cyber technologies that are out there that can be used both to protect us and our privacy, but also can be used to exploit cyber weakness. And so that's why we use the STEER framework, is to have a good handle of what we think is a complete picture of how this technology could be implemented and be made useful to the American public.
Of the three technologies that you look at here, and again, it's neural implants, general purpose robots, and technology to remove space junk, which of them do you think presents the most immediate challenge for federal agencies that make it harder to manage maybe than we might think?
Well, I think the one that is particularly, pressing right now is the orbital debris. And the reason for that is that when we're particularly looking at low Earth orbit, and space is big, absolutely, there's a lot of space up there. But in the low Earth orbit realm, there's actually not an infinite amount of space. Not only is it a particular range of distance from the Earth, it actually you can only put satellites in certain areas because of space weather and other interference. And so there is actually a limit of how much is up there. Plus, when you think about something in low Earth orbit, it is not a piece of something sitting somewhere. It is moving very, very, very fast. And so you have to keep track of where it's going all the time. And so making sure that space is available is really important, because we've obviously seen with some of the new technologies that are going up there, there's a lot of value for low Earth orbit. And there's a lot of really useful things. I mean, that's very close to where the International Space Station is as well. So how do we want to continue to use this domain that is particularly valuable for communications and science and research and economics, but also keep it clear so when you launch something into space, it doesn't get hit by something. And so there's quite a bit of interest in that area, and we think that's an area that needs the attention of Congress.
Almost all of these technologies would cross federal agency boundaries. So in the regulatory space, what are the biggest challenges you see when technology is still a little bit over the horizon and agencies need to get themselves together across boundaries to start to think about regulatory frameworks?
Well, and that's what we bring up in reports like these. We talk about what is the existing regulatory framework for each one of them. And we talk about what agencies are currently responsible for it, but also what could be done to help make it easier for industry to operate in these domains and bring that economic value that we know science and technology already brings to this country. The last thing that is actually really interesting, particularly in the space orbital debris, is it's not American property. There's no American space, right? It's all space for every country. And so there's now, with that one, an international collaboration component, as we need to think about what treaties did we already agreed to? Do we need to modify them? Do we need to create new ones to help manage the material that's up in space so that everybody can benefit from it?
Congress is having trouble regulating technologies that we already have. Just take Bitcoin or cryptocurrency as one piece of that. Do they have the capacity to organize around these scientific concepts and develop regulatory frameworks?
Yeah, I mean, Congress has, they have us. We have a bunch of scientists and policy folks who work together to help them understand what the issues are and the technologies and the complexities of them. They often also have scientists within their office that are provided by different organizations and fellowships. So they have the capacity to do it. The question is, what is the benefit to their particular constituents? And I think that's where sometimes we get a little tangled up because, each little area is interested in what is best for them. And I think we're going to get there. In Congress, like I said, they have the capacity to do it. And I think you're going to start to see really interesting things coming out of them.
This report doesn't have recommendations, but it does have policy considerations. Walk us through those and where you think they'll wind up.
So some of the policy considerations we like to bring up for each one of these, and they're different from recommendations because, again, these are 10 years out. So where GAO often is looking at a program and saying, oh, this is something that needs to be corrected in order to save the taxpayers money or to improve the outcome of this particular program. We're often both. these aren't programs we're looking at. We're looking at the science and technology and a potential future economy. So the policy considerations we bring out are things like we should look at the treaties for space and make sure that there is an agreement that each country who's going to have a space program and is putting things into these limited orbits has a plan and a financial commitment to bring the technology down or to move it to a place that's not going to be in the way. For the generalized robotics, we need to think about, okay, if we're going to have these things in our home, around our children, they need to have some safety thoughts, right? We need to have some sort of framework that we can agree these technologies are safe and are going to do the things that we ask them to do. And then for the neural implants, that is really a fascinating area as well, because you think about, okay, if I can elect to get a neural implant that allows me to control my computer, does that make me a more valuable employee? All right. So is there going to be a time in the future where you get an advantage for a particular job because you have elected to get an implant? Well, what does that mean for our labor force? What does that mean to make sure that people have equal opportunities to get their jobs? So it does change the way we think about employment and the capacities and capabilities that each of us has as a expert or whatever we do. I mean, me as a scientist, I'm like, well, how does that impact my scientist? My job as a scientist, if I can control devices with my mind, that's pretty wild to think about.
I've been speaking with Dr. Sterling Thomas, GAO's Chief Scientist. Thanks so much for joining me today and helping us lift our eyes a little bit up to the horizon and see what's coming.
Happy to be here. Thank you so much.
We'll post this interview and a link to the report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.